Jesus has been arrested at night after being betrayed by Judas, one of his disciples. They tied him up and brought him before Pontius Pilate, the governor, who was the only one who could condemn someone to death. They said he deserves to die because he is perverting the nation and trying to set himself against the emperor and make himself king. Pilate sat on the judgment seat and agreed with them. Then he handed Jesus over to be crucified.
Jesus was thrown into a holding cell with 2 robbers who were to be executed that day. When the soldiers who were in charge of executions were ready, they were led out and each was told to pick up and carry one of the heavy crosses. The soldiers laughed as they told them it would be the cross upon which they would die. Then the gate from the prison was opened and they led Jesus into the street. He was surrounded by soldiers with swords and spears ready. Jesus carried his cross as they made their way through the crowd.
Even though Jesus was God, when he was born as a human, he didn't try to hold on to being God. He emptied himself and became a servant to all. On the morning Jesus was forced to carry his cross, he was tired. He had been up all night. He had been beaten, whipped, and mocked by the soldiers. He hurt all over. He was exhausted when they told him to carry his heavy cross. He tried his best, but the weight was too great. He stumbled and fell, with the heavy cross crashing on top of him.
Fourth station, Jesus meets his afflicted mother. As Jesus struggled up the crowded street, he suddenly saw his mother Mary. She was horrified to see him, bloody and staggering under the weight. Though she knew Jesus was special, that he was God's son, she still sometimes did not understand. It hurt her to hear people talk about Jesus as a rebel, an outcast, and a criminal. She did not know why he let things get this far. She had seen the miracles. She had heard him teach and change people's lives for the better. When she saw Jesus carrying the cross, her heart was broken at the horror and cruelty of it all.
The soldiers on the crucifixion detail were getting impatient. The prisoners, Jesus and the other 2, were walking too slowly. The crowd was getting unruly. They tried to prod Jesus on with their boots and the back of their swords, but they could tell he was getting too weak to continue. They had done this many times before, so they looked into the crowd and saw a sympathetic face. They saw an African from Cyrene whose black skin made him stand out. His name was Simon. He was a religious man, a pilgrim to Jerusalem for the Passover. He was confused by all the noise, anger, and hatred. The soldiers came and yanked him out of the crowd and told him to carry the cross. Simon was terrified. He thought they were going to crucify him. The soldiers laughed and assured him he just had to carry it. When Simon saw Jesus' gentle but sad eyes, he was glad to take the cross from him.
The process began to move a little faster, but the crowd thickened. Many people wanted to see this king who was without beauty or majesty. The crowd despised him. He looked awful, barely human. He was covered with blood, dirt, and sweat. When people finally saw him, they backed away like they might catch a deadly disease. One lone woman came forward, braving the taunts of the crowd and risking the swords of the soldiers. She was moved with compassion for Jesus and came up and wiped his face clean with a wet towel. She returned some dignity by letting him feel a kind and gentle touch.
They prodded Jesus on, trying to move up the uneven stairs of the street. Jesus stumbled and fell a second time. The crowd booed. The soldiers cursed him and forced him on his feet. Jesus never said a word. He was trying to keep up, but he tripped. He knew what was being done to him was not right, but he did not protest or fight back.
The eighth station of the cross, Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem.
On the road they came to an empty space. A large crowd was there, and among them was a group of women. They were crying and weeping for him. Some had been his followers. Some just mourned for anyone who was going to be crucified by the Roman soldiers.
Jesus called out to them. He said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." He comforted them by letting them know that in spite of everything, he was all right. He also warned them that they and their children must repent and follow God.
Jesus struggled on, pushed and shoved by the guards and the people. He fell for a third time. No one helped him up. He was all alone. He felt the darkness and gloom overshadow him. There was no way out. He could see no good at all. They teased him and surrounded him with bitterness and hatred. They made him dwell in the dark like the dead of long ago. As he fought to stand, he wondered if he would be able to continue. All alone, he got back on his feet, only to find himself at the top of the bare hill where they would set the cross.
They had come to the place called the Skull, a barren rock on a hill by a cliff. They prepared to crucify Jesus and the two robbers. They stripped off their clothes so they were naked. The executioners teased the men by pretending to offer them a drink of wine, only for them to discover that it was mixed with bitter gall. They threw dice to see who would win the clothing Jesus and the others had worn because they planned to sell it. The soldiers roughly forced Jesus to lie on the cross and pounded nails into his hands and feet. The blood flowed out from the wounds, staining the wood and dripping to the ground. They put a sign above his head that read, "The King of the Jews." They raised the cross and set it in the ground. The two robbers were also crucified, one on Jesus' left and one on his right. They were left there to die with a slow and horrible death while the soldiers and crowd watched.
As Jesus hung on the cross, the nails tearing at his flesh, he looked out. He could see and hear the crowd. Some jeered him, saying, "He saved others, let him now save himself." Jesus answered, "Father, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." Others in the crowd pleaded with the soldiers to put him out of his misery. Most stood silent, knowing in their hearts that this was wrong. Jesus saw his mother and the other women there. He also saw one of his disciples with them. He told the disciple to take care of his mother. Finally, after about 3 hours, Jesus cried out in a large voice, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." His head fell forward as he died.
When Jesus died, the ground shook, the sky darkened, and all the people became silent. One of the soldiers, whose job it was to execute prisoners, said surely this man was innocent. The crowd began to go away as they set up the ladder so that they could take down the body. Mary rushed forward and took her beloved son's cold body in her arms as she wept bitterly.
They were about to throw Jesus' body over the side of a cliff like they did to the others they crucified, when a rich man from the city of Arimathea came forward. His name was Joseph, and he was a disciple of Jesus. He asked Pilate if he might give Jesus a proper burial. He had papers, and the soldiers were more than glad to get rid of him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb that had been cut out of rock. Then they rolled a great stone over the door of the tomb.